Hi there, welcome back to Chapter 9. Please feel free to support me and buy the commercial-free version, or pick up an ebook. You can find the link below. Enjoy.
Chapter 9, Dueling at Noon. Patrick's weeping soon turned to focused rage. He could not stop pacing in the Freeman's tiny home. The Freeman family and the doctor were still in shock. The old skinny man yelled at Isaac in Jewish tongue and forbid him to take part in the duel. Isaac stubbornly ignored him and dismissed his orders, shaking his head. Indenturees were not allowed to make any challenge until their contract was fulfilled. Both servants, due to the egregiousness of the insult, ignored this custom. Isaac spoke up after being silent so long.
We need a strategy to level this challenge. I've dueled once in my life, but it'd be with an axe,
Archibald interjected.
This Potts is a cur. He lacks courage to fight by blade. This is fortunate, though, because Mr. Edgington was wearing a very fine blade, and I assume he is very skilled at handling it. We do not want blade combat. I do assume if Mr. Potts killed 4 men already, he has more pistol experience than you, lad.
He soberly addressed Patrick.
So you'll have to get him into an up-close and personal duel. Agreed. You would never challenge us to blade or fist, Isaac concurred. That being the case, let us get as much pistol play as possible between now and then,
Archibald resolved.
Boys, go fetch the dueling pistols and as much shot and powder as we can find.
The entire family marched by torchlight to the shot-marked pine tree. Shots echoed through the dark marshes all night as the two men honed their killing craft. They ran out of shot by mid-morning and returned to the blacksmith's house. Marion and Heather fetched them fresh bread and eggs for what could be the duelers' last meal. The combatants sat in stoic silence. They stayed focused, rehearsing the correct pistol-firing procedures repeatedly in their minds. Amos came limping in with a bandaged foot. He stated solemnly, "Father, noon hour is approaching. We need to depart."
Lads, do you have any last orders for me?
Archibald sadly inquired. He felt strange calling the two men lads, as they were about to encounter grave battle, but he needed to comfort himself as much as Patrick and Isaac. Patrick replied with a dry mouth at last, "I like the ocean. Bury me at sea if it's not too much trouble. And if that letter ever finds my family in London, tell them I was thinking about them in the end." Patrick then stared out the window.
The doctor knows where to find my sister. Ask her to make sure I get a proper Jewish burial,
Isaac asked. The group slowly got up and embraced each other. The hugs were heartfelt, as the Freemans had come to love Patrick as family already. The duelers finished saying their final goodbyes and walked lockstep down the dusty road. "Isaac, you don't have to risk your life as my second. I can still request single combat," Patrick offered.
You would do this for me. It is an honor to be there for you now. I will be your second, but be sure to demand cross shots for me. I want to see this Jew-hater shit his pants while he dies,
Isaac smiled. Patrick nodded as they continued down the road and out of town. As they approached Thunderbolt, they saw Potts and Edgington sipping tea under the shade of the two lightning-scarred trees. A large crowd had already gathered. The tall aristocrat had bragged all night in the tavern he was staying at about how he'd end this hedonistic bloodline forever. It seemed that every Jew in the village came out to support Isaac, thanks to the doctor. It was no longer a secret event hidden away from the authorities. Mariana, Prudence, and their families also came in support, quietly holding back their frightened tears. On the edge of the crowd, watching intently, was Madame April Sky and a few of her women of ill repute, painted and dressed for the morbid occasion. We had thought you pissed your leg and ran off like a kicked dog, Mr. Potts called out, insulting Patrick and Isaac while playing to the gathered crowd. With faces like gravestones, Patrick and Isaac only had cold stares for a response. The aristocrat flourished with a handkerchief in his hand, continuing his theatrics. "Well, no reason to delay your death any longer," he smiled wolfishly. "Shall we establish the rules of this duel?" He continued. "Blacksmith, we have chosen you to proxy."
"I accept your offer," Archibald responded. "First, an understanding of terms must be met. Do all parties agree to this duel to the death, with seconds?"
"Aye." All four combatants replied in unison, glaring at each other.
"The first man challenged has his choice of weapon for the rest. I lay out these for your choosing. Remember, you may also pick open hand."
Archibald opened a large bag his son was carrying and displayed the arms on the ground. 4 hunting swords of similar length,
4 dirks, and 4 pistols were displayed.
Mr. Potts inspected each choice of arms carefully, turning the dirk slowly in his hand. The crowd gasped when he finally reached for the broadswords. Isaac and Patrick both looked at each other, attempting to conceal their cold panic. Neither had much experience with a blade. Mr. Potts then abruptly changed his mind and picked up the dueling pistol. The Queen Anne firelock pistols were a proper matching set crafted specifically for dueling. The other 2 pistols were similar in look, but were aged and worn. They were borrowed that morning from Prudence's father, the tailor. Potts looked over the crowd and then searched Patrick's eyes, hoping the younger man would tip his hand. Then he nodded to Freeman to indicate he had chosen. Archibald then gathered the pistols, dividing the fine Queen Anne pistols between Potts and Patrick, and then gave Isaac and Mr. Edgington the mismatched flintlocks. The 4 men loaded their pistols carefully while listening to their instructions. Archibald spoke loudly so the whole crowd could hear.
"The challenged may set paces."
"I choose 20, the smug jeweler announced. "As I thought, you coward," Patrick snarled. "Too afraid to face me like a man." "You do not want to have any challenge at all? Suit yourself, sir. I oblige, 10 paces. A brave gentleman would accept the terms of cross-shot as well. Patrick baited Potts' ego. "You make this too easy, boy." Potts grinned evilly. "Accepted." With the rules agreed upon, Archibald then paced out 10 steps and stuck a sword in the ground. He repeated the procedure the opposite direction. "I also thought you might like to know what happened to your lovely mother and sisters." Potts began to snicker, smiling at his lapdog, Edgington. "My associate, Mr. Edgington, helped them gain employment at London's most renowned brothel. That is, after he enjoyed them for himself." Patrick started to raise his pistol, but Isaac grabbed the barrel and pushed it back towards the earth.
"Not like that,"
Isaac whispered, reassuring Patrick.
"Soon enough, friend."
Archibald then instructed nervously, with his voice almost quivering.
"Take your marks, gentlemen. When I drop this cloth, you will exchange 1 round of fire."
All 4 gentlemen fell silent as death as they approached the swords sticking out of the ground. The crowd backed away from the line of fire and grew very anxious. It was so quiet that a light autumn breeze could be heard rustling through the leaves of the ancient burnt trees above them. The 4 combatants then took their respective places. Patrick mirrored Potts, walking 5 paces over, and behind them were their seconds. Archibald gulped a hard swallow and lifted the red linen handkerchief in the air so all parties could see. Patrick turned straight on, exposing his entire body to the aristocrat as a challenge. Not to be branded a coward in front of the large crowd, Mr. Potts reluctantly matched his posture with Patrick's. The duelers were all sweating with perspiration, dotting their foreheads, and their pistol grips became moist with anticipation. Time seemed to slow down. As if swimming through molasses, Patrick watched the red cloth drop from Archibald's hand. The entire world went silent. The virgin dueler saw Mr. Potts raise his pistol and was immediately overwrought with panic and fear. Patrick nervously stumbled with his pistol, pulling the trigger and firing it into the ground. His eyes and nose burnt as his senses became overwhelmed with the powder's white smoke. Patrick then felt a punch to the side of the head. His knees crumpled, and slowly he fell to the ground. His head fell to fire, and his eyesight filled with crimson. As he lay on the ground, he saw Isaac laying next to him. Forgetting his own pain, he became extremely upset to see his best friend was holding his right arm that was now covered in blood. Patrick's ears were like church bells on Sunday. The ringing was deafening. Mr. Potts' weasel-like voice was laughing hysterically at the inexperienced dueler and his bloody friend lying at his side who was moaning. "Dandy of a shot, boy," Potts taunted. "Were you trying to shoot the devil before you meet him?" Patrick shook his head and attempted to collect himself as he slowly sat up. The world seemed to tilt and twirl a little. He then touched his ear, which felt like it was burning. He looked at his hand. It was covered with blood. To the scarred-faced man's relief, his second, Isaac, was now setting up as well. The two wounded friends nodded at each other, confirming they both survived, and then turned their gaze downrange. Huh? Mr. Potts had stopped laughing abruptly. He was gaping in disbelief at his associate, Mr. Edgington, who was clutching his bleeding chest and gasping desperately for air. The more the shot man's chest heaved, the more red his shirt became. Patrick thought he looked like a dumb farm animal, aware that slaughter was imminent. "Reload!" Archibald's steely voice commanded. As instructed, Amos and Maximilian ran out and took the pistols from Patrick and Isaac's hands. They deftly reloaded as Patrick helped Isaac back to his feet. Voices in the crowd shrieked at the sight of so much blood, while others, with a more morbid fascination, clapped and howled for more. Not one soul came to help Potts or Edgington reload their pistols. Edgington, who seemed to gain some sort of sense, spit blood and cursed. "Let me kill this horned Jew fuck. Make Jesus happy before I pass on." He then ordered Potts, "Hurry up. Load those guns and get me to my feet." Mr. Potts paused a moment. He could see Edgington's wounds were mortal, but then he quickly moved to follow the instructions. Within a couple minutes, the four men were again standing at their marks, pistols ready. Archibald raised the linen cloth again. Isaac's bloody right arm hung limp as he was forced to switch pistol hands. Mr. Edgington was fading fast. His mouth hung agape, and he blinked excessively, as if falling asleep as he swayed his weight from his left foot to his right foot, wobbling like a drunk. The red in his shirt was spreading quickly, and the top of his pants were becoming wet with blood. Patrick still heard ringing in his ear. Two blurry images of Potts danced before him. Patrick shook his head and rubbed his eyes with his free hand. As Potts somewhat came into focus, he hissed a last promise. "I'm going to introduce you to the devil with this shot, boy." The crowd grew silent again, and it seemed like an eternity until Archibald's handkerchief fell. When it was finally released, it was like a leaf slowly drifting on the warm breeze. Patrick could feel his arms slowly climbing up to his target. A puff of white smoke engulfed Edgington as a fire eats paper, and the man fell like a timber that had just been cut down. Mr. Potts was taking in time, ensuring he aimed true. His head tilted as his steely gaze stared down the barrel, searching for a mortal shot on Patrick. As his sight pointed directly at his inexperienced opponent, he was blown off his balance and spilled over onto one knee. Potts screamed, grabbing his shattered, bloody shin. When the bloody aristocrat looked up, he was horrified to realize that Isaac had trained his gun on him instead of Mr. Edgington. Patrick seized the opportunity. He held his breath and slowly squeezed the trigger as Archibald had taught him. There was a click, a puff of white smoke, and then the explosion of the shot. Patrick felt death in his hand. When he opened his eyes, the hazy smoke of his pistol was being blown away by the breeze, and he saw the tall aristocrat grasping his neck that was spewing blood and staggering to take balance on his good leg. Potts was struggling to breathe and wheezing as his neck gargled like a fountain. "Send me to the devil, Potts." Patrick pounded his chest with his pistol in hand. "I'm right here." Potts raised his pistol and pathetically attempted to stand steady with one of his legs shattered below the knee. His arms shook erratically, and he could barely muster enough strength to keep the pistol raised above his hip. His pistol cracked, echoing through the woods, creating a small cloud of smoke, but the shot was wild. Pot collapsed, drowning his own blood. Patrick shouted at the fallen man, "I hope the devil makes you his whore, you evil fuck!" The victorious man was hatefully staring at Potts, lying in a puddle of his own blood, when he heard his friend screaming. He immediately turned to Isaac, who was holding his right hand to his chest as he rocked back and forth. Patrick saw blood running down Isaac's forearm from where his finger once was. As he rushed to his friend, he screamed for the doctor. He put his arms on his Goliath-like friend, who was sitting on the ground. Isaac screamed, "Fuck!" He gritted his teeth and his eyes were squinting with pain as Isaac looked at his friend.
"I'll be okay. Just fucking hurts like hell."
Isaac tried to smile. Patrick nodded dumbly. Isaac could tell his friend was gravely concerned and winced when he spoke.
"Forget about me for the moment. Let's watch those evil bastards die."
Patrick nodded again. They both turned to their fallen enemies. Edgington was crumpled into a ball, like a calf that had just been slaughtered. His eyes were vacant, and his open mouth seemed to kiss the ground. The corpse's buttocks were stained brown when his bowels evacuated themselves when his life left him. Isaac smiled when he realized his prediction came true. Indeed, he had actually made the Jew-hater shit his pants. Potts was still struggling, his body convulsed. Some gathered around him, but all knew he was done. Potts made a terrible sound, like a cough muffled by a wet quilt as blood bubbled from his neck. Patrick's vision finally cleared again, and he was able to see the pupils of Potts' eyes constrict to the size of a pinhead. He gargled one final bloody cough, and his pupils became as wide as a shilling as the last bit of color left the flesh of his face. Potts finally stopped moving. Archibald immediately took control of the situation and urged the girls to collect the weapons before the redcoats arrived. He ordered Maximilian and Amos to drag the bodies of Potts and Edgington into the swamps and cover them good until they became a gator's dinner. He then instructed Dr. Nunes to bring Isaac and Patrick back to the Freeman house to treat them. The crowd quickly dissipated as the Freemans scurried to work. Within minutes there was no sign that the duel ever happened in Thunderbolt. Dr. Nunes was struggling to stop the bleeding from Isaac's stump of a finger. Isaac was shot a second time, but still managed to get a miraculous shot off into Mr. Potts before the pain overtook him. Both duelers were taken by the battle, numb to pain and the world, only focused on killing. Patrick had never killed a man, or anything for that matter. The grim reality was starting to overtake him as he became emotional by the trauma. He cried and cursed, occasionally pounding on the table, and was racked with guilt for his wounded friend. Archibald had meticulously cleaned the blood from the indenture's head and ear when he finally calmed the young man to be still. Freeman examined his hairline, delicately combing Patrick's hair from the wound, and surmised,
"Lad, I see lots of blood but no real injury. This is the luckiest dueling wound I've ever seen."
The apprentice's eyes blinked as he listened. Archibald smiled grimly and stated,
"You just lost some skin, and you might have another scar, but you'll be fine."
The doctor walked over to Archibald and Patrick, wiping the blood from his hands with a rag, and announced,
"The bullets passed through the muscle in Isaac's arm. It'll be numb for a while, but it'll recover."
The doctor's voice lowered with seriousness.
"The finger, though, it's a different and more complicated case. We'll have to take fire to it to stop the bleeding. We should burn it now while his senses are vacant."
The blacksmith's sons were instructed to stoke the fire pit and get the coals hot. When the fire was ready, Archibald sunk a cattle branding iron deep into the embers until the steel glowed. He carefully removed it and handed it to the doctor. The entire Freeman family gathered around the table where the hulking Isaac lay and held him by his arms and his legs. Marion parted his jaw and put a wooden spoon handle in his mouth. Once Isaac was secure, the doctor did not hesitate and quickly placed the glowing iron on this bleeding stump. Isaac let out a piercing scream. His back arched with pain as he ripped his arms and legs from the combined grasp of the Freeman family. He raised his smoldering stump of a finger towards the heavens and spat out Marion's wooden spoon. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Now jolted out of his stupor by the pain, stood on his feet, and the first thing he noticed was 2 muskets pointed at his chest. The group, so busy struggling to hold the giant Jew down, never noticed the group of armed redcoats ascend into the yard. Sergeant Luther reported,
"Commander, this must be them. They be covered with blood."
Commander Kingsley strutted into the yard and stated, "Indeed. They match the description of the duelers." His face was stern like a statue as he gave the order. "Take them to Oglethorpe for judgment. Shoot any of the Barnacle colonists that resist." The Freeman family anguished with fear. Their feet were like stone, unmoving in front of the armed British troops. Dr. Nunes pushed his way forward and demanded,
"I'm escorting these men. I'm not done treating this patient."
In an annoyed tone, Kingsley complied. "So it be." 2 pairs of soldiers grabbed Patrick and Isaac by their arms just under their pits and roughly escorted them out of the Freeman yard. They shoved the bloody men through town to the curiosity of many onlookers. They were then dragged to Oglethorpe's gigantic tent near the bluff. Although he resided in the largest structure in the city, the eccentric, well-dressed man preferred to work out of a field tent. Isaac and Patrick stood before the tent as Kingsley disappeared through a flap to seek audience with his superior before presenting the accused combatants. After a long, uncomfortable half an hour standing in the waning afternoon sun in front of the tent, the 2 were ushered in. The tent was arranged similar to the king's court. Oglethorpe sat regally in back upon a throne-like chair while his minions orbited around him. The man seemed apathetic, as if the proceedings were a nuisance, and announced, "There are no lawyers allowed in Savannah, so you will have to present your cases." He cleared his throat, letting Patrick and Isaac languish in his words. "You 2 are charged with dueling and the murder of 2 men. Make your case." "I did duel 2 evil men today," Patrick boldly stated. "It was a fair duel, and the rules were observed." "Please," Oglethorpe sniffed, "explain exactly what this duel was over." Patrick hoped for reason and justice and threw himself at the mercy of the wigged man. He explained his entire story of Mr. Potts and how it was a matter of family honor. "Do you have any words in your defense, second?" Oglethorpe asked Isaac.
It was exactly as Mr. Willis told it. I was the second, and it was a fair fight. Ask any one of the witnesses, Isaac pleaded.
Oglethorpe turned to Kingsley and asked, "And what were the witnesses saying about the duel?" "The rumors proper etiquette was observed and the fight was fair," Commander Kingsley stated. He then continued, hoping to persuade his superior. "But, sir, you have a very strong stance against dueling, and I would advise that you wouldn't want to appear soft on your own rules." "I want the colonists to feel that I am just, but sympathetic," Oglethorpe snapped. He made a temple with his hands just below his nose and considered the evidence before he gave his verdict. "My ruling is the challenger is free, but execute the second." "Dismissed." "No!" Patrick protested. Isaac was stunned for a moment, and then the 2 duelers moved for Oglethorpe. They were immediately restrained by 6 soldiers surrounding Isaac and Patrick with muskets drawn.
"Wait!"
Dr. Nunes yelled as he stepped between the guns.
"Mr. Oglethorpe, if you damn this innocent man and execute him, I vow I will help you no more. I will not treat one of your soldiers even for the smallest ailments. I'll leave them to bleed out on the battlefield. So Moses help me. I will be your doctor no more."
The wigged man scowled at the doctor, but held his tongue. Instead, he looked long and hard at the doctor and the condemned Isaac, considering his next words carefully. "Doctor, you have been a good friend to the Crown, and I have long appreciated your services. If you vouch for this man, I will suspend his sentence." The kind Dr. Nunes released a relieved breath as Oglethorpe continued.
Ah, good.
But be aware, good doctor, you are now bound to this man, Isaac Schwartz. Any trouble, and you will both answer for it. Is that understood? The doctor's hands were trembling, and he cleared his throat as he responded,
I understand.
Oglethorpe waved his hands, and his soldiers drew down their guns. The party was allowed to leave unmolested to Commander Kingsley's visible dismay. As Patrick and Isaac walked through Oglethorpe's tent flat, the commander and his sergeant glared at the freed duelers.